Once upon a time, Guerrilla Games was best known for their work with first-person shooter genre Killzone, through which they found moderate success, but by its fifth entry it became clear that the studio was in dire need of a shakeup, which gave rise to Horizon Zero Dawn, a much-needed shock to the studio system and a gamble that paid off big time. Horizon Zero Dawn not only saw one of the strongest debuts for a new PlayStation IP both critically and commercially, but over time Horizon Zero Dawn came to be one of PS4's best-selling games, period. It would be an understatement to say that the sequel has been highly anticipated, especially following its impressive gameplay unveiling, making it one of PS4 and PS5's flagship titles of 2022. So after having played and rolled credits on the review copy provided by PlayStation, how did Horizon Forbidden West hold up for me? Well, for my part, I'd say that while Forbidden West didn't hit the highs of other open-world action-adventure PlayStation titles like Ghost of Tsushima and God of War, it is still a game worth checking out for fans of this genre. If you enjoyed Zero Dawn, then yeah, you're guaranteed to have a great time with Forbidden West, as the sequel improves upon the original in just about every way. As soon as the game granted me control over Aloy, I noticed immediately improvements to how the game feels to play, kind of like when you immediately jump from Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2 or from Uncharted 1 to Uncharted 2. There's both a sense of familiarity and a sense of palpable refinement. Everything from movement to combat feel tighter, better, and more fine-tuned. But more substantial are the ways in which gameplay has been expanded. Climbing surfaces, for example, is no longer confined to specific jutting structures like in Zero Dawn. You can now climb rocky surfaces where the game's new scan function reveals these yellow highlights. Just don't expect the level of flexibility you'd find in, say, Assassin's Creed or Zelda Breath of the Wild, where you can climb almost any surface save for a few consistent exceptions and limitations. Horizon Forbidden West is more restrictive, so you will encounter scenarios where a surface maybe looks like it might or should be climbable, but scanning it will tell you otherwise, which does mean that there is less room for creative mobility, with climbable surfaces being more deliberately set by developers, but it's still a significant improvement over Zero Dawn's more limited vertical navigation. There were times when climbing could behave oddly, like Aloy occasionally jumping to or grabbing onto the wrong ledge, choosing not to grab ledges and taking an unexpected fall, climbing feeling a bit too sticky at times, and then there was the occasional colliding with simple protrusions that she could easily walk over, but instead it got treated as like an invisible wall almost, etc. But overall, it's definitely functional enough. Then there are the new special gear and tools like the welcome addition of the Polecaster, a grapple shot that can be used to pull yourself towards certain grapple points for quick platforming, vertical mobility, and repositioning both in and out of combat. It can also be used to latch onto and pull certain types of rubble, vents, and/or surfaces to create new openings for environmental puzzles. The implementation of a glider is also pretty substantial, allowing players to conveniently jump off and scale down cliffs for a safe landing, to traverse the open world by air and enjoy lush vistas along the way, to reach otherwise inaccessible platforms, and it also has its uses during combat as well, especially when it comes to stealthy entrances and stealthy kills. Another major addition is underwater gameplay, which does infuse a bit of variety to mission and level designs, though underwater swimming controls could feel a bit tanky and unwieldy from time to time. Fortunately, underwater environments are used sporadically enough and don't overstay their welcome. Just don't expect to be doing anything crazy underwater, as there is no underwater combat. Swimming is primarily used to move around certain spaces, solve specific puzzles, or to hide from enemies on the surface. But there's still plenty of fun to be had traversing on foot or through land-based machines you can ride by hacking them. In combination, these additions make for an open world that's more enjoyable and less constraining to explore, a world that the Decima game engine brings to life with often mesmerizing effect. Utilizing the same engine as Death Stranding, it's no surprise that micro details like moss, foliage, general flora and fauna, particle effects, and models of objects, armor, weapons, and character models, as well as macro details like jungles, landmasses, settlements, skylines, and weather effects all look spectacular, in no small part thanks to the distinct art direction. Much like Zero Dawn, Forbidden West's world aesthetic combines lush and varied environments, landscapes, biomes, and terrain with tribal visual motifs, futuristic machinery, as well as remnants and ruins of a lost advanced civilization, all of which give Horizon a unique flavor, but now there's the added layer of new tropical environments and plenty of new sights to behold in what is an entirely new map. The game does feel like it pushes last-gen graphics to the limit while taking advantage of PS5's power for extra resolution, graphical details, and performance, so the game is still quite the looker. Aside from its lush environments, the design of the game's animalistic mechs that roam the wilds, including all new types, as well as the attention to detail in their animation are made all the more impressive in the sequel. Huge strides were made with character models, which in my opinion often looked waxy and mannequin-like in Zero Dawn, but look a lot more realistic and pleasant to the eyes in Forbidden West, further aided by really impressive lighting that accentuates the minutiae of character design and models. Body and facial animations during cutscenes and conversations have also undergone a major facelift, having come a long way from how uncanny and robotic Zero Dawn's animations could look. Lip syncing, eye movements, skin simulation, subtle twitches, grand gestures, little tics and reactions, nuanced expressions, they all come across very well and make for far more natural looking and feeling characters. Though animations during character interactions aren't always perfect, the way Aloy's hair spazzes out constantly can be a bit distracting. There were times when characters' eyes would have that empty thousand-yard stare where it doesn't look like they're making eye contact or looking at anything. Sometimes eye movement could go overboard and present some ridiculous-looking expressions, and there were a few times when facial animation could delve a bit into Mass Effect Andromeda territory of uncanny, but these moments were the exception, not the rule, occurring infrequently enough as to not be hugely detrimental. More often than not, Forbidden West is just impressively rendered and animated, and the presentation of dialogue conversations is a cut above many other AAA games. It doesn't hurt that the game achieves a consistent 60 frames per second in performance mode, save for a few minor micro-stutters here and there, and like in other games, performance mode sacrifices resolution and some graphical details for smoother gameplay. Now, I did try to swap back and forth between performance and fidelity mode for a graphical comparison, and while I can't offer Digital Foundry levels of graphics and performance analysis, the main difference I could see was that everything looked sharper and less fuzzy and was less prone to distortion artifacts in fidelity mode. Things like distant foliage in particular looked noticeably sharper with less abundance of jagged lines and edges. For me, the visual differences weren't so significant that I felt it was worth sacrificing performance, but what's great is that ultimately the choice is yours. Now, beyond the wondrous new sights to behold, the game's new region is also host to substantial new content, the main course being, of course, the brand new campaign that serves as a direct sequel to Zero Dawn's cliffhangers. The campaign took me a little over 40 hours to beat in combination with completing a decent amount of side quests. I still have plenty of side quests left to do though, so I suspect I can get about 10 to 20 hours more out of this game, even more for those intending to go full completionist mode by acquiring and upgrading all armor and weapons or finding every single collectible. I had a pretty enjoyable time with the campaign, which heavily expands upon Zero Dawn's key revelations. In Zero Dawn, we learned that the renegade machines roaming the lands were created by once powerful and influential humans, more specifically a megacorporation, almost a millennium ago, before a mistake led to what were once peacekeeping machines going rogue and threatening to ravage the planet and wipe out the human race. This instigated Aloy's clone ancestor Elizabeth Sobek to create Project Zero Dawn, which involved the construction of artificial intelligence that would be granted the knowledge, power, resources, and means to re-terraform Earth after the inevitable impending cataclysm comes to pass. Unfortunately, the primary AI function known as Gaia was corrupted by a mysterious signal that not only gave sentience and individuality to its sub-functions, which were intended to manage different aspects of the terraforming under the governance of Gaia, turning them into individual rogue AIs, but also scattered them and set them free to wreak havoc. These now compromised versions of Project Zero Dawn, the Gaia AI, and its rogue sub-function AIs are not only causing the once peacekeeping roaming machines to go berserk, but also spawning a blight that's leading to the planet's decay instead of its rebirth. So Aloy is tasked with finding the rogue AI sub-functions and merging them back with Gaia so that its primary function of terraforming can be properly realized and the world can be saved. Now, I've always found that there are two sides to every fictional narrative. There's the intellectually engaging overarching plot and conflict, and then there's the more emotionally engaging character arcs and development. To me, a good story needs a healthy balance of both, though I do place a higher importance on characters' personal journeys, as it's through these characters that emotional attachments to the fictional world's conflicts and inhabitants are formed. When it comes to Forbidden West, on one hand, if plot is what you're seeking, you're gonna find plenty of it in Forbidden West, which presents quite a few important revelations about the mysteries and circumstances that led to the demise of the old advanced civilization and the calamitous conflicts that the current civilization must battle against. It also presents new geopolitical discord that will further color the remnants of this world, all accentuated by well-performed dialogue, well-crafted cutscenes, and epic set pieces, and for many, that may be enough to keep them invested in Forbidden West's narrative. But as someone who places that special level of importance on compelling characters, this is one area where I felt Forbidden West fell short. So much of Forbidden West's narrative and dialogue is propelled by exposition, meant to offer information about plot devices, MacGuffins, and lore, leaving less opportunity to explore characters' personal struggles, arcs, and journeys, to get to know them as human beings, and leaving little room for deeper character development. Characters do have personality, don't get me wrong, more so than in Zero Dawn thanks to what I feel is improved writing paired with enhanced visuals, and characters do undergo some changes like revelations about the world changing their beliefs or trials and tribulations developing trust and loyalty, but it doesn't feel like the game scratches too far past the surface. While the game explores the world, conflicts, and viewpoints that are associated with characters, I didn't feel like I really got to hang out with and know them as people and human beings, not as much as I'd like at least, and it just made it difficult for me to care about them or be emotionally stimulated or invested. The game eventually does drop you into a headquarters of sorts where you can converse with companions a la Mass Effect's Normandy, and there are companion-related quests you can partake in. They just don't achieve the level of depth and character exploration that the Mass Effect trilogy, or hell, even the latest Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy achieved, in my opinion. Characters came across two-dimensional at best, that Z-axis always seemed sorely absent. This includes Aloy, the protagonist, who is such a, tightly wound-up character and always has such a frustrated and sarcastic attitude that she doesn't always come across as the most likable.
Forget something back in Meridian?
Look, Varl.
It doesn't matter. Made it just in time.
Frequently giving off the vibe that she doesn't seem to particularly enjoy interacting with people. And not to say that she doesn't have her tender moments.
Then don't let anyone push you around, okay?
And I do like how tough and badass she is, how she doesn't take shit from anyone, how she ultimately wants to help people, how she does have integrity and a good moral compass. But too often she comes across as someone who's kind of annoyed at everything. This is likely on some level intentional, as one of Aloy's biggest character traits is that she's always been something of a lone wolf. She got rejected by society, exacerbated by the burden of the fate of the world riding on her shoulders, so she's always hesitant to accept aid from her friends and comrades or just take a moment to rest, which can be an interesting trait to explore, but I don't feel like the scope of her character arc challenged and explored that trait enough. In fact, I generally didn't feel like Aloy underwent much in the way of substantial on-screen character development, nor did I feel like there was enough focus on her interpersonal relationships and internal conflicts throughout the campaign story, and what little there was on that front, I felt didn't quite bring it home in a riveting way. So ultimately, while the plot of Forbidden West kept me interested enough to have me invested in unraveling its mysteries, the game narratively left me feeling cold. I did feel like every key character from the protagonist to the supporting cast had the potential to be a lot more compelling, as there are solid personality foundations there, but not enough is done with them. The campaign mostly felt like an expansion to the Horizon Encyclopedia, with not enough deeper exploration of people. If you think back to Ghost of Tsushima and God of War, it's easy to point to the personal conflicts that the main characters were going through in parallel to the wider narrative, and it made it easier to connect with those characters. For me, Forbidden West skews too far into the wider narrative aspect of things and just kind of forgets too much about those personal conflicts. And the same goes for the game's side quests, which tended to offer just enough story and stakes to serve as excuses for more gameplay, but most of them felt pretty forgettable outside of the functions they served. The game also doesn't have the most varied objective types for main and side quests. You'll either be infiltrating and or taking out groups of enemies of humans or flocks of enemy machines, partaking in cool large-scale combat set pieces and boss battles, doing some investigation using the returning focus feature, following trails towards the next objective, finding text logs with access codes for locked entrances, or doing some form of dungeon crawling while solving puzzles involving platforming, climbing, manipulating the environment, pushing and pulling boxes, or a combination of these. I've never been a big fan of those follow-the-trail mission objectives that open-world games tend to have, and Forbidden West can at times lean on them a bit too much. As for the puzzle solving in this game, they're fine but far from the most clever. Platforming and climbing puzzles tend to be more about finding the right platform and climbing point rather than any sort of creative problem-solving, critical thinking, or test of skill. There are certain environmental puzzles that feel more involved, but they tend to recycle the break-apart walls to create new entrances and move blocks around puzzle structure instead of each puzzle feeling wholly clever and unique enough. The game's pacing can also be hampered by just how much looting you have to do in this game before, during, and after quests and encounters, picking berries for healing and herbs for making potions, killing the occasional wild animal to extract ingredients for potions, fast travel consumables, and other forms of crafting, and collecting or being on the lookout for the plentiful resource chests. I wish that looting animations would be made faster to expedite this process, or that there was a way to mass loot an area, or that they would reduce the amount of loot sources while making each one more substantial in their contents. It just feels to me like a significant fraction of my time with Forbidden West was spent walking around looting corpses and chests. Horizon Forbidden West's most engaging gameplay was undoubtedly carried by its combat, which is super cool in many ways and a huge improvement from Zero Dawn. But it is still flawed and frustrating in some ways. First, the positives. As previously mentioned, the addition of new mobility mechanics like the Pullcaster and the Glider do add an extra layer of complexity to combat, but there are other combat-specific enhancements that further bolster Aloy's capabilities. One of the additions I most celebrated was the expansion of the weapon wheel, which can now house 6 weapons instead of Zero Dawn's 4. There are so many different weapon and ammo types in Horizon, and I remember that in Zero Dawn I felt discouraged from using all of them because of how unintuitive it was to constantly have to go into the menu to swap weapons. In Forbidden West, the extra 2 slots do go a long way in providing extra room to equip your ideal arsenal to take down a wide variety of enemy types. Aloy's significantly augmented skill trees also unlock new melee combos, enhancing one of the most undercooked aspects of the last game. There's also a new mechanic where if you hit enemies enough with heavy melee attacks, a body part will start glowing blue, indicating that you can shoot it for an explosive energy discharge. Furthermore, Aloy can unlock active skills known as weapon techniques, with each weapon type having its own variety of skills, triggered by aiming and pressing R1 to fire instead of R2, and easily cyclable by selecting them in the weapon wheel through the D-pad. There is one weapon skill that allows you to make it rain arrows, another that lets you shoot all the loaded bolts in your crossbow like a machine gun, and among my most used are techniques from the sharpshooter bow, like this one that allows you to shoot 2 arrows at once, or this one that grants you a focus shot that gives you a better zoom and can deal additional damage, and or this louder explosive sniper shot that can decimate enemies. Techniques usage is limited by Forbidden West's equivalent of mana called Weapon Stamina, as indicated by this yellow bar, which slowly recovers passively but also recovers faster when you're actively fighting enemies. And then an additional layer is what can be best described as ultimate abilities called Valor Surge, which can only be unleashed with enough Valor charge as indicated by this purple bar. Valor Surges range from major passive buffs to big healing or defensive effects to convenient and or deadly active skills like temporary stealth cloak or this big radial burst of energy. I would be encouraged to use more varieties of them if I could switch my equipped Valor Surge on the fly through the weapon wheel, but unfortunately there's the inconvenience of having to select them in the skill tree menu in order to equip them. That one complaint aside though, when all of these new combat elements are combined, the end result is a combat system that has a lot more depth than Zero Dawn, while also inheriting the most compelling aspects of its predecessor, namely its strategic and high adrenaline combat against machines with on-the-fly crafting of your weapons and tools ammunition. Against humans, Horizon Forbidden West is more of your typical combat affair. You can hit them a bunch with your various melee combos, ranged weapons, skills, and abilities, or you can engage them stealthily from up close or through well-placed long-distance precision shots. Against machines, however, particularly some of the bigger ones, combat becomes a lot more involved as you're not only forced to keep track of their aggressive attack patterns, but also the various pieces that comprise their construction. be it armored sections, weak points, pieces with elemental weaknesses, body parts that can be torn off to extract crafting materials. This is where the game's returning focus function comes in, as it allows you to glean out information regarding these different parts, and you can even tag the specific parts that you want to focus on during combat, be it a weak point to exploit, a body part, or a container housing valuable materials you wish to specifically target and detach, so on and so forth. On paper, these are all really cool ideas, and when combat works and clicks, fighting these animalistic machines, or even humans riding these animalistic machines, can be uniquely exhilarating, especially with the varied arsenal of weapons that the game offers, from your traditional bows and crossbows to metal frisbee flinging contraptions specializing in detaching parts from machines, to explosive javelins, to slingshots that lob various elemental bombs, to various types of traps and trap-setting armaments. The larger scale machines are especially a sight to behold, and fighting these are undoubtedly among some of the best, most fun, and most exhilarating moments in the game. There's this Monster Hunter kind of thrill and joy you get from fighting these. But combat is by no means perfect, and in my opinion doesn't quite meet the bar set by God of War or Ghost of Tsushima. Melee combat, despite its expanded options, can still feel a bit basic and somewhat clunky in how it flows. It still feels a bit too sluggish and tanky for my taste. I also felt like additional defensive options beyond dodging and rolling were sorely missing. You can't block, parry, deflect, or counter in this game at all. Not to mention that dodge timing and enemy hitboxes could feel unpredictable and inconsistent from time to time, and not all incoming enemy attacks feel like they're well choreographed with clear visual or audio cues. There's also no lock-on in this game, so you're dependent on the game recognizing which enemy you want to attack based on where you're pointing your left analog stick. The game does its best to have your attacks track and pull you towards the right target, but this targeting system can be hit or miss. Aside from occasions where the game attacked the wrong target, there were times when Aloy's attacks would track enemies unnaturally far, practically flying through the air, and then there were other times when Aloy's attack would not properly track and pull itself towards close proximity enemies. She would attack nothing, just the air. A few other times attacks would track the right target, but the weapon swing would inexplicably miss. I've also seen weird instances like Aloy getting stuck in midair while trying to dodge and roll away, which got me killed. As for ranged combat, while it is a superior option, it could also feel inconsistent in its targeting. There were a number of times where I thought I had lined up a shot pretty well, only for the arrow to inexplicably deviate, like unnaturally so. I think a lot of it may have to do with how projectile spread works, and if that's the case, it's unforgiving enough that I never felt like I could get a full handle on the game's aiming and shooting. Sometimes it feels like the game is auto-targeting the wrong enemy parts. Either that or there's just something wonky going on with aiming. Like here, for example, I'm using the shredder weapon to tear off the component towards the rear of the machine. My aim is lined up perfectly, you can see right here, and yet the projectile proceeds to target the eye instead. Or right here, my arrow completely deviates far outside the reticule's radius. This is all further complicated by enemy machines being so lively in their animation that even in bullet time or concentration mode, it can be easy to miss those smaller targets and body parts. The slightest twitch from the enemy can cause your shot to miss its mark, and combine all that with the inconsistent aiming, and sometimes it feels like landing shots is harder than it should be. Combat is further brought down a peg by just how much micromanaging you have to do for your arsenal. While expanding the weapon wheel to house 6 weapons instead of 4 did make a big difference, 6 equipable weapons still doesn't feel like enough, largely due to how ammo types work in this game. Let me explain. Throughout the game, you'll find variants of each of the 9 core weapon types, with higher rarity ones obviously having stronger stats, more mod slots for additional passive boosts, and higher quantities of ammo types, up to 3. Having these different ammo types available is important because they can exploit a variety of enemy weaknesses, but the game does not allow players to customize ammo types for their preferred weapons. They are predetermined and preset. What that means is that if you want to carry around every type of physical and elemental ammo to be prepared for any situation, you have to seek out the right combination of weapons that happen to have the right combination of preset ammo types. And there are a lot of ammo types: 3 physical, 7 elemental, 3 that apply status effects, and 4 other special types. That's, what, like 17 ammo types right there? And among those, some have advanced variants that cost more to craft but deal more damage. So the sheer variety of ammo types can all make it very difficult to fit all of your desired weapon and ammo types in the weapon wheel's limited 6 slots. It almost feels like deck building, except instead of being able to choose individual cards, you have to pick from various preset stacks and cobble something together. It does get better in the late game when quests and shops will reward and sell higher rarity weapons that have 3 preset ammo types instead of the more common 1 or 2, but early on and throughout a good portion of the campaign, it just felt like the game constricted my ability to be creative during combat and to sort of achieve a playstyle of my own. Usually 3 or 4 weapon wheel slots will be taken up by bow variants in my attempt to have a full spectrum of arrow types readily available, leaving little room for some of the other more unique weapon types, especially if their ammo types were redundant to what I already had equipped. It doesn't help that the process of switching weapons in and out of the weapon wheel is still unintuitive, like in Zero Dawn, involving having to go into the menus, so I couldn't get into the habit of switching weapons constantly before every encounter. And the lack of a master stats table in the inventory menu to indicate exactly what ammo types you do have equipped so you can easily sort through what to equip makes this an especially tedious affair that forces you to look at weapon stats individually and having to keep information memorized as you're customizing your loadout. What I would have preferred is for all weapon types to be accessible through the weapon wheel. You can only equip 1 of each weapon type, but you do have all of them, and this weapon wheel would allow players to switch available ammo types of a highlighted weapon on the fly at the press of a button, giving players the full suite of customization options for which type of ammo they want to use for which weapons at any given time. To me, that would have been ideal. The game tries to encourage a creative approach to trapping and hunting animal machines through clever usage of weapons and tools, but equipment restrictions and how micromanaging ammo types could be restrain my ability to fully unleash that combat creativity. I also wish that cycling through consumables would be handled differently. Instead of having to sift through them with the D-pad, I wish they had implemented its own separate wheel. There are enough varieties of items that it can be a struggle to intuitively find the one you want, especially in the middle of combat, leading to scenarios where, say, I wasn't able to find and use the potion in time to make a quick health recovery before the enemy's next attack killed me. Then there's the added layer of how unintuitive the focus HUD and UI feels. It took a bit for me to get the hang of what information was being presented and which information was useful. Now, as I previously mentioned, if you don't want to lose sight of a specific machine part, you can tag selected parts and they'll be highlighted in purple. But if multiple parts are highlighted because they're the same purple color, it's easy to mix up which part is which, especially once combat begins and the enemy's thrashing all over the place. I would have liked to see maybe color-coded highlights for different part types like physical weak points, elemental weak points, and detachable resources, or the ability for players to set the color of highlighted parts, customize them to their liking, or a tagged part being labeled by the HUD would have gone a long way. This goes doubly true for elemental canisters attached to enemy machines that will explode when struck enough by an ammo type of the same element. Highlighting those can be a detriment as the purple color will obscure the elemental canister's color that indicates its element type, and in the midst of chaotic battle, it's just easy to forget which type a highlighted part was. But at the same time, highlighting can be important as body parts like elemental canisters are small enough that they can be easily obscured, especially on the larger machines. So tagging these parts can just help you keep track of their exact location so you can shoot them when the opportunity strikes. But since highlights are the same purple color, it can also be disorienting. Paired with the micromanagement of weapon and ammo type loadouts, the weakness exploitation aspect of combat can feel overly bloated and counterintuitive, both because of equipment limitations and how information is presented. I would have preferred if there were less ammo types so the game could focus more on strategic use of all available equipment instead of micromanagement of a limited loadout. The culmination of all of this is that I felt discouraged from using more tactical approaches with trap-based weapons and more incentivized to stick to the tried and true shoot enemy weak points and shoot vulnerable elemental parts. Now, with all that said, I don't want to give the impression that combat is awful or anything. I had a lot of explaining to do about the things about it that didn't work for me, but combat is still overall really fun and functional enough. I just think the game gets in the way of itself with some of its design choices and doesn't allow its great combat concepts to reach their full potential, and therefore combat doesn't make up for some of the repetitiveness of quest design in the same way that Ghost of Tsushima did, whose combat system was so good that it was easier to overlook some of the more repetitive feeling quests. But that doesn't mean that Forbidden West combat can't provide its fair share of thrills, excitement, badassery, and challenge, and stealthy combat options feel a lot more viable and fun here compared to Zero Dawn, thanks to all of the game's new combat and mobility options and all of the capabilities offered by the stealth skill tree. Forbidden West also provides a greater sense of progression compared to Zero Dawn thanks to its vastly expanded skill tree divided into 6 categories: Warrior, Trapper, Hunter, Survivor, Infiltrator, and Machine Master, which are pretty self-explanatory. There are a lot of selections you can put skills into, so you are going to be leveling up and or receiving skill points constantly throughout the game. Beyond leveling, skill points can also be earned by completing quests, all of which give out a predetermined amount. While not every option in the skill tree feels substantial or exciting and can make the skill tree feel a bit padded out, I did enjoy the constant pacing of progression and unlocking some of the more substantial feeling enhancements and abilities. Aloy can also be bolstered through the acquisition of new weapons and armor, which can be earned by completing quests or bought through shops scattered across the land, all of which can then be upgraded at a workbench with the right funds and crafting materials. I did find the progression of new weapon and armor acquisitions and upgrading them to be a bit too sluggish. With armor, for example, I swapped a grand total of maybe like 3 or 4 times throughout the 40 hours I spent beating the campaign, and not for a lack of armor variety. It's just that both armor and weapon, especially the rarer and more powerful ones, can be on the expensive side relative to your financial progression, and then upgrading them and maxing them out also requires a good amount of money as well as effort, as well as collecting and spending rarer materials that can only be taken off of specific machine types, which forces you to go out of your way to find herds of those machine types and hunt out the resources you require. And where weapons are concerned, this further exacerbates the micromanagement aspect that hampered combat for me, as certain weapons may have one of its ammo types locked behind an upgrade. And who knows, some might enjoy how involved weapon and armor upgrading can be, but I eventually found it a bit tedious. It'd be one thing if the first few upgrade levels tended to be looser on requirements, but almost always I found that through every level of an upgrade tree, I was always missing some component that forced me to go out of my way to hunt down the necessary resources from either machine animals or real animals. The game does, however, allow you to create custom jobs for required materials. I will see the map reveal exactly where to acquire those specified materials. It's definitely not the worst process in the world, but it's just eventually having to repeatedly do this with a combat system that didn't fully win me over just to upgrade weapons every time I acquire a new one could feel like a lot of padding. Beyond story-driven main and side quests, the open world is also sprinkled with points of interest and activities like fighting pits and battle arenas that test one's combat prowess against human combatants while serving as tutorials for more advanced melee combos and techniques, hunting challenges that test one's prowess against machines while serving as tutorials for effective strategies to hunt them, a Fire Emblem-style tactics-light tabletop minigame that acts as Forbidden West's equivalent of Gwent called Machine Strike, which has you defeating opponents throughout the land while collecting or buying new board pieces, rebel camps and outposts to infiltrate and take down to be retrofitted into safe havens and fast travel points, campfires that serve as both fast travel points and safe checkpoints, relic ruins that sees you solving self-contained puzzle areas to reach certain valuable items, cool-looking dungeon-like interiors called cauldrons that involve climbing and platforming puzzles paired with combat sequences, all of which can feel a bit too similar in their aesthetic, level design, and structure. Unfortunately, every cauldron kind of feels the same, I'd say. An activity called Vista Points involving finding the exact spot a holographic image was taken by matching it with environmental clues, which is just one of a wide variety of collectible types for completionists to seek out. Cosmetic customization of armor and face paint, which is neat, but I do wish there was transmog in this game, and more. All nice and optional distractions from your typical questing and some nice chunk of extra content to fill out the open world. You can seek them out yourself, or you can take advantage of what are essentially mobile UB towers called tallnecks, which are quests within themselves actually, that may require some platforming, climbing, scavenging, and or environmental puzzle solving to override, after which map areas will reveal icons you can pursue and check off. Not all distractions are of the positive variety though, as I did encounter some bugs, glitches, and technical issues that, while not severely game-breaking or anything like that, could be disruptive enough, at times disconcertingly so. It is worth noting that there is going to be a Day Zero patch for Forbidden West that is meant to solve a host of technical issues that the developers are well aware of, so these issues may be resolved for you by the time you get your hands on the game, but I'm going to share what I experienced in case there is the possibility that you might encounter these as well. For example, one issue I encountered a decent amount of times was mid-gameplay loading screens that would result in the screen fading to black for a brief moment, but this was something that Guerrilla mentioned in the review guide, saying that they knew about this, and after the Day Zero patch dropped late in the review process after I had beaten the game, I went back, played like 2 hours more or so, and during that time I actually didn't encounter the fade to black loading ever again, though there was a note that the base PS4 version of the game may encounter this from time to time because of its hardware limitations. A more severe issue was a save file corruption problem that occurred in one specific main quest of the game. If at any point during that quest I exited the game or died, the quest's autosave would become corrupted and any attempts to load it would leave me in an infinite loading screen. Now, I could get around this by reloading from a generous list of past autosaves, but it was still an inconvenience to have to do that if I perished during the mission. Fortunately, I had an older save file to test this again after the patch dropped, and I'm happy to report that as far as I can see, this issue has been resolved. As for less concerning but still fairly disruptive bugs or issues, these ones I couldn't test after the patch to see if they were resolved. I did have some issues with the game's swimming system, whether it was Aloy and the camera spazzing out during certain underwater tunnels, a weird bug in one of the levels where the game would think there is water where there was none, or Aloy unnecessarily going into swimming mode on bodies of water that were shallow enough for her to walk on, which could lead to interruptions during both navigation and combat. Disruptions also happened during land traversal. One time I encountered a bug where the camera went completely crazy and off-center after using the pullcaster on this entrance, and on multiple occasions I encountered an issue where Aloy would stay stuck in looting animations with no way to get out of it, forcing a reload. Reloads can also be frustrating because they don't keep track of things like placement of lootable machine corpses. Reloading will actually cause them to disappear, so if this bug that I just mentioned where Aloy would stay stuck in looting animation happened before looting everything and reaching the next autosave checkpoint, then the forced reload would cause me to lose all of that loot. Speaking of loot, there was this one time where the game wouldn't allow me to enter this vent that housed a loot chest. An invisible wall was there for some reason. I've occasionally encountered quests and objectives not triggering properly, forcing me to reload, like NPCs you're supposed to follow getting stuck, or the fighting pit not registering the moves its objectives demanded of me even when I executed them as instructed, or sometimes the game not allowing Aloy to talk to NPCs for some reason. Twice the game randomly crashed on me mid-mission, but at least it's pretty quick to get back in the game because loading times are pretty fast. In one quest, I managed to overcome an obstacle in a way that wasn't intended, so Aloy wouldn't stop repeating the dialogue hinting at how to solve the puzzle properly long after I had moved past it.
If I move one of the crates up the ramp, I should be able to stack it on top of the other one.
And then there are visual bugs such as surface light flickering and occasional weird-looking lighting effects, a noticeable amount of jarring pop-in, and not just small distant objects but also large nearby environmental assets. Sometimes cinematic camera pans will be stuttery for some reason, cutscenes with glitchy visuals like this one where there's a massive amount of pop-in, or this one where characters are walking through doors, or hell, one time I found a door I could walk through during gameplay. I don't want to make the impression that Forbidden West is in a disastrous technical state, far from it, but there were enough rough edges to it that I did feel they negatively impacted and interrupted the gameplay experience that it's definitely worth pointing this stuff out, and I'm hoping that the Day Zero patch will resolve the majority of these. But look, with all said and done, Horizon Forbidden West is a game that I would recommend to PS4 and PS5 owners itching for a quest-driven, open-world, third-person action-adventure game. The game does fall short of its full potential in key facets like character storytelling and combat and technical polish and other areas, but there's not a single aspect of it that's egregiously bad. And Forbidden West does shine in key areas like visual and auditory presentation and aesthetic, overall graphical fidelity, the music and sound design is fantastic, the design encounters of machine enemies are frickin' epic, especially those mammoth-sized ones. The fascinating world and its many conflicts and mysteries are fun to explore and will keep you intellectually invested, and this game does not overstay its welcome with Ubisoft levels of grindy padding. If you're a fan of Horizon Zero Dawn, you'll probably end up loving Forbidden West because it's everything about Zero Dawn but better. If you're a newcomer to Horizon but enjoy this genre of open-world games, as long as you keep some of the potential flaws and shortcomings you might experience in mind, I think you'll still overall have a really good time. Horizon Forbidden West falls just shy of achieving, say, the status of Game of the Year nominee, for me personally at least, but this is still very much a worthy sequel to Guerrilla's hit new franchise.
This delve is a story for the ages. All thanks to you.